Good evening. My name is Steve Doty. I'm the current president of the Pearl Chase Society. Our organization was formed to honor, respect, and continue the good works of one of the most celebrated and important figures that created our special place that we know as Santa Barbara, Pearl Chase. In the coming speaker series, we hope to bring attention to the people and movements of that complex history. Thank you in joining us for this evening for our inaugural speaker honoring one of our founding members, preservationist Kellam de Forest, who made an indelible impression on citizens who strive to preserve the historic qualities and character that made Santa Barbara the epicenter for a preservation of buildings, landscapes, and the shape of a community, and who envisioned a future that embraces the past. Celebrated architect from Santa Barbara, Mark Appleton, said, Kellam was an unpaid but devoted citizen who always wanted architects and their clients to be more attentive to Santa Barbara's architectural history. He was a dedicated defender of it and always spoke out eloquently. For the next several months, we invite you to join us for the storytelling on topics that provide the groundwork for our beautiful city in architectural heritage and inspired landscapes. I want to make special thanks to Claudia Schau and her group of dedicated Pearl Chasers who put this together. It's really a fantastic organization. I think you're going to enjoy it. Now I'm pleased to introduce local historian Rick Closson, president of the Pearl Chase Society from its earliest days. He was a close friend of Kellam's and the De Forest family, who will share extraordinary insights about Kellam's professional life that took him far beyond Santa Barbara. Following Rick's talk, we're going to join out at the courtyard for refreshments and a chance to ask Rick and others here any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome all of you to the early show. My name is Rick Closson, and I'll be your host. And tonight, I have a very special guest. It is the wild, the crazy, and the funny, and young Kellam de Forest, like you've never seen him before. So, without any more of that, let's get on with it. Let's get serious here. I had to get that out. Oh, first, a word from our sponsors. And those would be his three kids, Anne, Carmag, and Elizabeth, who I pestered, and they were so tolerant, they were so generous and giving of their time to do script clearance on what I'll be presenting tonight. You'll understand the significance of that later on, but it was just, if there's anything you like about the presentation tonight, you can blame it on Kellam or Anne or Elizabeth or Carmag. If there's anything you don't like about it, it's my fault. Okay. We'll learn later. It's only appropriate to welcome you tonight with a movie poster. They don't make them like they used to. That's what they say about movies. That's what they say about some people. In Shakespeare's 1599 play, The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, Mark Antony says, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives on after them, while the good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar." By the end of this monologue, the sarcasm to the Roman crowd was obvious. Tonight, and in the series that follows, the series of presentations in future months, we hope to set aside that sarcasm to show that the good that some people do does live after them and does not remain interred with their bones. Your attendance tonight and for future speakers will be part of Kellam's good, ongoing good, not to be interred with his bones. I come to praise Kellam, not to bury him. He was born 8 weeks premature in 1926. At Cottage Hospital, that was a 32-weeker in today's parlance. He weighed 2 pounds. He was the tiniest baby that had been born there to that time. His mother's maiden name, Kellam, was given to him as his given name. And at the time, his parents were living at 1327 Olive Street, while the home on Todos Santos that most of us know was being built. The De Forests had married in 1925. They founded the monthly magazine, the Santa Barbara Gardener, in 1925, and they edited it until Kellam's father entered the Army Air Corps in, appropriately enough, the camouflage division. He was a landscape architect in 1942. They were members of the Community Arts Association, which encouraged Spanish colonial revival style architecture in Santa Barbara even before the earthquake. And they were part of the Bernard Hoffman Pearl Chase Plans and Planting Committee to rebuild Santa Barbara after the quake. Kellam's mother, like Pearl Chase, had experienced the San Francisco earthquake firsthand. She had been a graduate student at Stanford at the time. Kellam's uncle was architect Windsor Sewell, so the family traveled in notable Santa Barbara circles. Kellam's grandfather, also a Lockwood, was from a wealthy New York family during the Gilded Age. You can see the 1891 portrait of him that currently is in the National Portrait Gallery, and it was painted of him as a rich son of a wealthy New York family. But he was better known for interior design, and he was part of the aesthetic movement around that turn of the century. And on the right, you'll see an image that I took from Wikipedia, which shows him in a Greek costume. He was apparently a wild and crazy guy like Kellam, his great-grandfather, or his grandson. That Lockwood, the one you just saw, and his wife, Meta Kemble de Forest, Kellam's grandparents, had lived in Santa Barbara since 1913, nearby at 1315 Laguna Street. They often visited the Todos Santos Lane property, and you can see it in the in-progress landscape in the photo of Kellam on his knee. Let's see. The contrast is not terrific, but behind them here is the house as it's being built. Let's see. There, and the other photo is him sitting on his grandmother's knee. The new house was finished in about 1927, and the family moved in. Kellam had the run of the place, and until he was about 9 years old when his younger brother, Lockie, was born. And here's a backyard photo of him with his father, Lockwood Jr., in a tent, and with his mom, Elizabeth, and his younger brother, Lockie, for short. Kellam made only one trip outside of the continental United States. It's pretty hard to believe for a learned guy like him. In July 1934, at age 7.5, he took his only trip. It would be, and this was a wonderful passport photo of him. He visited, in his family, visited Scandinavia and England. His parents, and he went with his parents and their Danish nurse, Agnes Brons, on Scandinavian-American steamship line on the SS Frederick VIII. And that is an image of Frederick VIII. And that's an image of a typical stateroom on the Frederick VIII, so that you can see it's a couple of bunks. And they had 2 staterooms, one for Kellam and Agnes, and the other for his parents. When they docked in Copenhagen, Kellam, with his nurse stayed at her parents' home in Copenhagen while their parents took a brief visit to Finland to visit the Finnish architect and designer Alvar Aalto. And here's a picture of Alvar and his wife, Aino, and an item of furniture that he had just designed and was producing the year before. And it's become an icon. This is the Model 60 stool, which they made in this stained birch in 1934. It was in raw birch in 33 when Kellam's parents visited him. In the earliest iteration of Apple stores, this is the stool that people had to sit on when they went in. And you can still buy them online from Arttech, and it only costs you $300 a piece. But they're quite popular. After leaving Copenhagen, they went to Great Britain. They visited nurseries and gardens, of which there are many in England, as you know, and then they came on home. He attended Roosevelt School, just blocks from the Todos Santos home, and later transferred to the Crane School, which was all boys at the time, in Montecito. And here's an image of that early Crane School building. And he moved from there then to the all-boys Thacker School in Ojai for high school. Lockwood's before Kellam, his father, and after Kellam, his brother, were also Thacker students. Now here's a photo dated 1947. It's entitled Thacker Horseman. Horsemanship was a big deal at Thacker, and Kellam was into it. I give you this photo not because any one of those horsemen is Kellam, but because there was an anecdote in the family that on an extended holiday break, Kellam rode his horse, the horse that was assigned to him, from Thacker School home to Todos Santos Lane, about 40 miles. In 1944, Kellam graduated, and he, of course, said, "Yay, I graduated, I'm going to college." And his horse said, "Yay, he graduated, I'm staying in Ojai." No more of that stuff. But he ultimately did leave Santa Barbara, and he was accepted at Yale in the fall of 1944. His mother was a Vassar graduate, and she got a graduate degree at Stanford, and his father attended Williams College in Massachusetts, and Harvard, and UC Berkeley. So it wasn't a big surprise that he would be accepted at an Ivy League school. And he was going to major in history. But a few months after he arrived and started at Yale, he enlisted in the Army. This is 1944. His father, Lockwood, remember, was already serving. And so he came back from Yale, from New Haven, to Santa Barbara, and then went down to San Pedro, to Fort MacArthur, to be not basic, maybe basic training. The family didn't tell me. This is all before Ann and Carmichael. Anyway, on his intake forms, it said, white, 5 foot 8 inches tall, 136 pounds, blue eyes, brown hair, ruddy complexion, single without dependents, and 1 year of college. The enlistment documents say that his service would be for, quote, the duration of the war or other emergency, plus 6 months, subject to the discretion of the president or otherwise according to law. Well, after basic training, Private Kellam de Forest was stationed at a supply depot in Pullman, Washington. Here's the only photo that we have of him from that period. World War II, of course, officially ended with VJ Day in September of 1945. Once again, he was a bulldog. He returned to his studies at New Haven. He was an average student, but he had time to manage the school's polo team. And of course, you can see him right there. He was very proud to be associated with the polo team there. He was the manager. He graduated in 1949 with a degree in history. His first job out of college had nothing to do with history, and it wasn't even in Santa Barbara. He went to San Francisco. And it had nothing to do with research. He was employed by the Johnson O'Connor Research Foundation. The company offered testing to determine jobs that best matched a person's aptitudes. And in the immediate post-war era, period, there's a telling quote from the company founder that must have appealed to Kellam. And of course, you can't read it there, but it says, "The individual who knows his own aptitudes and their relative strengths chooses more intelligently among the world's host of opportunities." So with that advice, and at the end of a year, Kellam returned to Santa Barbara, where he took a job at the front desk of the San Ysidro Ranch. And it was his great good fortune to meet a young teacher from the nearby Montecito School for Girls that was based at the time at Casa Dorinda. She was pretty, vivacious, born in the Boston area, not too tall, and graduated from a small liberal arts college in Vermont. Kellam was smitten by Miss Margaret McCormick, known to her friends as Peggy. On July 12th, my birthday, for those of you keeping track, but not in 1952, but in 1952, July 12th, they were married in the Framingham, Massachusetts garden of Peggy's home, family home. Kellam's brother was best man. You see him there. That's his mom in the middle. Kellam on the left. Then here is he and Peggy cutting the cake. Boy, that's hard. And then the toast, of course. You have to have those three elements every. The next day, the honeymoon started. The newlyweds started their auspicious honeymoon by traveling to Detroit, doesn't everybody? To pick up their new car, a 1953 Ford Crestline Sunliner convertible with a 3-speed transmission and overdrive. It wasn't uncommon then for buyers to travel to automotive plants to pick up their new cars right off the assembly line. So the new de Forests continued their honeymoon cross-country, wind in their hair, to Los Angeles, where Kellam had a business idea. I want to stop here, though, because I want to talk about automobiles. They were a big part of Kellam's life. Who of us knew? And significant vehicles pop in and out of his life throughout his early years. He loved his cars. First was a 1930 Model A Ford chassis that his father had modified to serve as a delivery vehicle for plant specimens. And here it is in their 1931 Christmas card. And you'll see, if you can see that, you can see that his dad, Lockwood, is driving, and his mom is reaching back and holding the potted tree, and on the very end is Kellam hanging on. And he looks pretty proud and pretty comfortable with where he is. It had a unique look, and its name was the Buffalo. And it got that name because the neighborhood kids saw the buffalo hides that Lockwood Sr., the grandfather, had picked up in his travels, and he had a lot of buffalo hides. And so when the original upholstery in the vehicle wore out, because it was a service vehicle, it trucked stuff all over, Lockwood Sr. suggested, hey, why don't you use these buffalo hides? And so the kids all called it the Buffalo because of that. Then the next couple of cars have to do with his Yale years. Here's a 1946 thingamajig. It has no body, it's just the chassis, and it makes you think that Kellam's following in his father's footsteps to customize some chassis. Then here's a 1948 Christmas card from Kellam, and even in good light, you couldn't see what he has written at the top and at the bottom, but it says, "Bringing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from Kellam." And then, of course, there's the honeymoon car. This is a picture of the snazzy honeymoon car, but also baby Anne in Kellam's arms, born in 1955. Then there's the 1953 Nash Metropolitan. They bought that in Los Angeles about the time that Kellam's business idea got too big for the living room or the dining room table. Both he and Peggy had outside jobs. They needed a second car. And the word from the kids was, nobody, as in nobody, drove that Metropolitan except for Father. He was quite proud of that. This color image is not of that car, but it is those are the colors. The kids are just amazed at to see that car again in color. And last, this is the family car. A 1963 Ford Falcon station wagon with bench seats, the stock roof rack, and a crank back window that you had to lower before dropping the tailgate for cargo space. Because as you know, before soccer dads had SUVs, they had station wagons. They did go to LA for a reason. Kellam had this business idea. So it was to establish De Forest research in Hollywood. When they arrived there in Los Angeles, Kellam knew what he wanted to do, and Peggy filled in with some reality. She got a job. And she worked for the Marlboro School for Girls, still there. And Kellam picked up odd consulting jobs. He did a short film about driver safety for the National Safety Council. Kind of fits in with his automotive interest. DuPont had a long-running radio program called The Cavalcade of America that documented historical events using stories of individual courage, initiative, and achievement. Originally, it was begun in New York as a radio program, and they relied on a Yale history professor to check them for accuracy, one of Kellam's history professors. And so when the program followed the stars, the radio stars moved to Hollywood, that's where they were making the movies, and the Cavalcade of America moved to Hollywood because they were going to do TV. It was only natural that they lean on the West Coast ex-student of the Yale history professor, and that's when Kellam got involved. He also consulted with writers who were writing scripts and gave them heads up early on. And there's an image of Paddy Chayefsky and Rod Serling, both of whom became Hollywood legend writers. In the late 1950s, Kellam wrote scripts for a couple of episodes of Jim Bowie. I don't know if anybody remembers that one, and Yancey Derringer. In their small home, the newlyweds had set up the new company, De Forest Research. But what did it do? They proposed to fact-check production scripts for accuracy, not just historical accuracy, but any detail that might be important or add to the authenticity of the production. So, for example, An early Gunsmoke episode needed to know, could an Indian testify at a court trial in Kansas in 1875? I know you know that answer. Yes, yes, he could. Do you know this answer? Anybody recognize this guy? Oh, you're too good. Yeah. In 1961, 2 years into the landmark television program, The Untouchables, the crew contacted Kellam and said that Al Capone's widow, Mary, but she went by May, is giving us fits. Every time we air an episode, she threatens to sue us because we are showing all these dastardly things that her husband didn't do, and that we're making him out as though he were a real mobster, when she says he wasn't. He was a sweetheart, and she's going to sue us. So they asked Kellam to check for future episodes, and they sent him the next 58 scripts that went to TV for him to check ahead, and he checked court records and newspaper clippings of the day to make sure that, yes, Al Capone did do those nasty things that they were showing. In 1965, I Spy turned to De Forest Research to confirm how was it that milk was delivered to hotels in Morocco? Oh, just like here, in big metal cans. He was once asked, what did telephones in Madrid look like in 1938? There's a picture for that. Once, a writer needed to know the name of a song that he wanted to use in a script. And he telephoned De Forest Research, and he hummed the tune over the phone and asked them to identify it. Da 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 da. And the person said, yeah, that's La Donna Mobile, Verdi's 1851 opera Rigoletto. So they didn't even have to write to him. And in 1970, oh yeah, the early pilot script of a proposed TV show set in Astoria, in the Astoria neighborhood of the Queens Borough in New York City, was sent to Kellam for review. The proposed name of that television series was going to be All in the Family, and the main character was named Wally Bunker. Now, De Forest Research found that there was already a Wally Bunker listed in the Queen's telephone book, and Kellam suggested that they name him, thank you, Kellam. The company created detailed and exhaustively complete De Forest reports. They became the industry standard for script clearance, which is the Hollywood term for fact-checking. On the right, you see a page out of a De Forest report, and the left column is just the scene, and then the middle column is the page, and then the scene, and then that long column on the right are the detailed comments. And on the left is a memo from Gene Roddenberry, and he was requesting that Kellam would break up his comments on the Star Trek series, because he says in the memo, you put all of your comments sequentially according to the scene and the page, and as you see. But I've got office people, and they're going to wrangle the legal issues, the copyright issues, all those other things. And then I've got actors and writers and producers on the other side, and they only care about what are the script comments. Could you break those in two? Of course, Kellam said, sure. But they were just that detailed. They were crazy detailed. I want to show you now, for about 3 minutes, a small sample of the scope of Kellam's work, while I give you more history about De Forest research. I'll start with a montage of movie and television posters that Kellam's De Forest research worked on, and you'll be amazed. At times, the whole De Forest family worked at De Forest research. As you view the montage, there are static black and white photos. They're all going to be here. And there are a couple that are in color that will show you first Peggy and then Elizabeth with Kellam working in the studio there. These posters only cover a portion of the years up till the mid-1970s. Here are Kellam's own words explaining how the company started. In his mid-career, for newspaper articles, Kellam would recall, "I always wanted to get into show business, but as far back as 1950, I found out you couldn't get anywhere in this business without something to sell. As television was in its infancy then, I knew they would need researchers, and I also realized that TV producers, particularly the independent ones, could not afford a full-time researcher. The primary function of the studio research departments originally was to provide pictorial material to aid in the building of sets on the back lot. If they wanted to know what a Welsh village looked like for How Green Was My Valley, they had files of material for reference. But as soon as the studios began to shoot most movies on location, the vast picture collections they had accumulated were no longer necessary. As a result, I made a deal to lease the old RKO library, and here I am, busier than ever and enjoying every minute of it and performing a useful service for the networks, the producers, the actors, the public alike. I work here from about 9 to 6, and then my evenings are spent reading scripts, books, or magazines to catch up. I must read at least 2 scripts every evening after my 3 children go to bed." After 3 decades, De Forest Research was still located on the Paramount Studios lot in Hollywood. It oversaw not only the Paramount and RKO libraries, but also MGM libraries. It had a staff of 9 researchers who worked with 16,000 bound volumes, countless magazines, and photographs. And in 1984, the New York Times declared that De Forest Research was, quote, "the largest Hollywood research firm operating today," unquote. That year alone, they were contracted to double-check the accuracy of 45 TV series, multiple episodes of each, and 100 feature films. After they had raised their 3 kids and a company that had revolutionized the industry, Kellam and Peggy retired back to Santa Barbara in 1992. The company was sold 5 years later and now operates under a different name. But it still issues De Forest reports because that's what the clients want. I want the De Forest report, not anybody else's report. The current company still uses the library resources, but the old scripts and the other material were donated to UCLA, where in the Charles Young Research Library, those holdings show that Kellam's involvement in more than 250 different television series and 500 feature-length motion pictures. You've just seen posters from about 20% of the TV programs and 10% of the films. Well, returning to Santa Barbara. Some notables become known by one name. It helps if it's an unusual name. Single name recognition can distinguish a person as being unique, or it can be bestowed as a sign of outstanding respect. And so I think it will be for Kellam, the man that we remember with a whip-smart intellect, a dogged determination to do what he knew was right behind the mask of his impish grin and halting speech. When Santa Barbans speak of any Kellam, it will always refer to our Kellam. Thank you. Well, we're right on time, and I think the wine and cheese is ready. So we can go outside. I'd be happy to discuss more of this with you, although I must admit, I didn't know Kellam in this depth, and so my knowledge of Kellam is pretty much everything you saw on the slides. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. But outside, I think I'd like to, for those of you who are interested, I'd like to read something from this book called Inside Star Trek, The Real Story. It's written by, the co-author is Herb Solow, who was the Desilu executive in charge of production for the entire Star Trek series. It's one thing for a fanboy like me to stand up here and tell you what a great guy and what great things Kellam did. It's another thing to have you hear it from a guy that he had to work with. And Herb just tells the story so much better. So let's go outside, get something to eat, something to drink. I'll read to you.